Hello, everyone. This is Nayiri from Low Carb and Fasting. This episode is going to be part of the series on my channel called Type 1 Diabetics Talk. And you guessed it, both guest and host are Type 1s, and we cover all sorts of topics related to Type 1 diabetes. Today's guest is a fellow Type 1 diabetic. She holds a doctorate degree in naturopathic medicine. She's also a certified diabetes educator. She's a TEDx speaker. Check out her video. It's called Sugar is Not a Treat. It has, last time I checked, it had over 4 million views. Dr. Jody Stanislaw, welcome to Low Carb and Fasting.
I'm so happy and grateful to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
Jody, the pleasure is mine. I'm really delighted to have you. I've been following you for a very long time. Started off with Facebook, and then used to do very quick Facebook videos, just record them from the beach and all of those, and talk about different topics. Okay, let's start off with your story of how and when you were diagnosed.
Right. Okay. So I had the classic story. I was 7 years old and I was painfully thirsty and wetting my bed and losing weight and all of that. So who knows if that was going on for a week or two, not very long. Went to the doctor, peed in a cup, urine was full of sugar, got checked into the children's hospital, and I was there for several days, it felt like. And I actually had a kind of a fun time because at 7, it felt like an adventure. I'm like, oh, I'm at this big building and there's all these people coming in to talk to me. And, it was a children's hospital. So they had like a game room and they had, murals on the walls, and it was really fun. And I was like, oh, this is so fun. And so it was then that I was like, I want to be a doctor. I want to be somebody that helps people feel better, because I just had so much fun there. So I really am grateful to my parents, because they never made me feel sorry for myself. And I think that's super important for any new parents that have a diagnosis. That my mom was like, okay, well, this is what we're doing now. We're not going to eat sugar. We're going to do 1 shot a day. We're going to measure and weigh our food. And I was like, okay, and I got a little scale and I got a little measuring cups and stuff like that. And, at 7, you're still so malleable that I think it was frankly the perfect age. I think 4 or 5-year-olds are pretty hard to manage. I work virtually with Type 1s all over the world. And, I have parents that have 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. And that's just, they're throwing their food across the room. They're not going to eat, right? And then if you're a teenager, you're like, I don't want to deal with this. What is this? Right? So I feel really grateful that I was 7, and very grateful that my mom never apologized to me. She never said, oh, I'm so sorry you have this. Oh, it's so awful. Like that would have been my attitude if she had said that, because kids just take on what the parents say. Right. So my mom was like, okay, so this is what we're doing now. And I was like, okay, that's what we're doing now. Now, having said that, years later, maybe 4 or 5 years later, I'm like, okay, this weighing and measuring your food stuff and like having to like write down if I have a piece of sugar, I'm like, this is not sustainable. I'm like, this is not, who's going to do this? Like, this isn't fun anymore. And so I did, I don't know if you want me to go into that right out of the gate, but I did develop an eating disorder and dealt with that for many years, and was sneaking food and, sneaking sugar and binging behind my parents' back and all of that stuff. So, but I'm happy to go into that if you'd like. But yeah, that was part of my journey too.
2 sentiments I want to share there. I was diagnosed when I was 5. I didn't understand it, but I hated. I dreaded the daily injections, and I would throw tantrums for, I think, probably over 2 years. Tantrums.
Wow.
And they would force the injections on me. They couldn't restrain me. I know grandma now have to hold me down because I would refuse the injections. So I went through that phase until it became too boring to resist, and I just had to come to, yeah, it's too boring to fight it off all the time. But it's interesting because I was diagnosed at what year was it when you were diagnosed? 80s?
1980.
1980. So I was diagnosed in 73, and it was similar to what you said. We had to not necessarily measure everything, but it was a very strict, lower. I'm not using the word low carbohydrate because it didn't even exist back then, that concept of low. Well, people didn't talk of it. It certainly was not labeled as such. But we were clearly told, we were given like a list of foods. These foods are good to eat. These foods should be limited. These foods are a no-no, like sugar and cakes and donuts were definite no's, like bread and this like rice and things in limited quantities. And then everything changed later on. I think you talk about that in one of your videos, that it was in the 1990s. Suddenly everything flipped, and we were told, eat what you want. Live normal like everyone else.
Right. Yeah, the pendulum swung from one extreme to the other, which has just been a detriment to our world. You know, the invention of the rapid insulins came out because I don't know what year Novolog and Humalog came out, but you know, at the same time that those came out, then we had the whole fat-free, you know, trend, which is what pushed type 2 diabetes over the cliff. You know, I remember eating frozen yogurt and Snackwell fat-free chocolate cookies and bagels. I mean, I ate all that fat-free, high-carb stuff. I didn't have a CGM back then. I can only imagine how bad my numbers were. But I never had a big rebellious period. I mean, obviously, my eating disorder was a thing, but I never had that period where I was like, I'm not testing my blood sugar and I'm going to eat anything I want. You know, like even when I was dealing with my eating disorder, I still tried to do it in a way that didn't mess up my blood sugars, if you can imagine. But yeah, it's really my passion. I mean, I've dedicated my career to helping type 1s, right? I'm a holistic physician. I 100% work with type 1s. That's all I do. I've been virtual for 10 years. And my biggest mission in life is to really get the education out to as many type 1s as possible. I mean, there's all the focus on the new technology and the new CGMs and the new pumps and the new insulins and the new glucagons. But where is the energy we need to help people get better A1Cs? Where is that? Where is people need to be empowered to know how to eat better, but really know how to dose better? I mean, you can be vegan, you can be low carb, you can be whatever, healthy food eater, hopefully is my goal, is that you're eating real whole food, but then you need to know how to dose for it. And very few people know how to dose properly. They don't know how to set their basal rate. They don't know how to check their basal rate. They don't know how to temporarily adjust their basal rate. They don't know how to dose differently besides just counting carbs for their meal, which of course isn't enough. They don't know how to avoid going low when they exercise. That is my mission. My mission is to deeply educate type 1s on how to feel masterful when it comes to dosing their insulin properly. And that I don't see happening anywhere. I don't see it happening. You know, it's all about the technology and the new time and range and, you know, the new smaller this and the faster that. Well, what I've read is that the overall A1C data has not improved. We have all these new pumps and all the, you know, Dexcoms and CGMs and the actual improvement in A1Cs is almost insignificant.
So what's required then? Better dosing, but also better diet?
Well, the educational piece.
Diet. Yeah.
They absolutely, well, yes, the diet, of course. But I mean, you know, there are those, you know, there's the type 1 grid, right? There's the Bernstein followers, and they are uber low carb. And then there's the Mastering Diabetes guys, you know, the two guys in California, they're both type 1, and they're all about raw, vegan, and they eat hundreds of carbs a day, but they eat almost no fat. And they get great results with people that want that diet. There are great results for people that want to do Bernstein. I see great results with people that do paleo and keto, right? So as long, in my opinion, you're eating whole food and real food and not processed, then you're already, giving your body healthier choices, right? I don't even call things that don't come from nature food, right? Cheetos aren't food, right? Ritz crackers aren't food. Food is grown from the earth, but Ritz crackers are not found in nature. Goldfish crackers are not found in nature, right? Snickers bars are not found in nature. So things that aren't found in nature aren't food. So let's first start with helping people eat food, but you can be eating all the healthy food you want. And if you don't know how to dose your insulin properly, you're still not, you're not playing with a full deck. Those are my two passions. It's like, let's eat real food. And now we've got to learn how to dose properly.
So let's talk about basal and bolus insulins.
Sure.
So I'm on a pump. So
yes.
I use one type of insulin in my pump. Obviously, I know some people aren't keen on the pumps. Bernstein himself isn't too keen on pump. I'm super low carb, but I use a pump, and I wouldn't change it for anything else when I want to give it up. So in the pump, you can only use one type of insulin. So mine is quick acting. And I found in the previous episode with Dr. Ryan Attar that he actually puts our insulin in his pump. So before we discuss all those details, let's just give people a quick definition, especially for those people who are newly diagnosed and they're all confused about this terminology: bolus insulin and basal insulin.
Sure. So I use the word basal and long acting interchangeably because I have hundreds of clients around the world, and most of the people are on pumps. I personally am on shots. My A1C is 5.2. I don't have to deal with all the hassles of pumps. I'm fine, right? So I'm not on a pump. But so the first thing in my 3-month program is, as I teach people, why do we need that insulin in the first place? Why do we need the pump to drip rapid insulin all day long, or regular, as Ryan does, which I'm sure, because he doesn't need anything that peaks fast, right? He's such a low carb, low, protein fat guy. So R makes sense because it has such a slow peak. Yeah. But classically, we have either Humalog or Novolog in the pump, dripping 24 hours a day, or a long-acting insulin, right? Levemir or Lantus, hopefully twice a day, or Tresiba, Toujeo, whatever. So you have to have background insulin in you, even if you're not eating, for 2 reasons. One is we would not be alive without insulin. You cannot live without insulin, right? We unplug from our pump, we stop doing our shots. Within a few days, we're not going to be doing good. We're going to be in the ER with DKA. And if they don't treat us well, we will eventually die, right? So insulin is necessary for life, regardless of if you're eating or not. Number 2 is your liver is feeding you glucose all day long, especially in the morning, right? People are like, why am I 80 when I wake up and an hour later I'm 180? I'm like, well, that's your liver, right? So, but it peaks, its highest output of glucose is in the morning. However, it outputs glucose 24 hours a day. So that is, you can it's funny. Well, it's your mealtime insulin for the meal that your liver is feeding you. So you have that background, and a perfectly set long acting or basal insulin should keep you at the low end of normal in the absence of any food and in the absence of any bolus or rapid, right? If you just roll with your long acting twice a day, or basal only on your pump with no bolus, and you don't eat, a perfectly set basal keeps you on the low end of normal all day. So that's the first thing I walk my patients through, is understanding that and then teaching them how to test that and adjust it, right? So I had this one patient, he came to me and he was like, I eat every 2 hours. And I'm like, oh, are you just really hungry? Like, why do you eat every 2 hours? He's like, well, I'll go low if I don't. And I'm like, well, you have too much basal. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, he's like, I'm diabetic. I thought we had to eat all the time or else we'd go low. And I'm like, no, not at all. And after, like, I think it was 20 or 30 years, in the next 2 weeks, we adjusted his basal, and you should have seen how many exclamation points he sent me in his email when he was like, I didn't eat for the past 6 hours and I didn't go low. And I'm like, great. We don't go low just because. We only go low because of too much insulin. That's it. And people, so many people are out there afraid of lows all the time, as if they just show up out of nowhere. I'm like, no, lows don't show up out of nowhere. It's 100% what's your insulin doing? So really getting that's the first educational piece. And then understanding, of course, when you need to temporarily increase your basal or decrease your basal, which is a whole nother, but understanding that baseline. I did a 7-day water fast once, just drank water for 7 days. And I just decreased my long acting, and I stayed at 70 flat for 7 days. No big deal. Yeah, it's absolutely possible when you understand how to dose insulin properly.
And to have the confidence to adjust your insulin yourself. So I did a five-day water fast too. 5 days was the longest one I've done. And I wrote a blog about it.
Oh, great.
It's a learning curve. You learn as long as you're doing it safely. You've got your glucose next to you. You've got the CGM. You're monitoring your blood sugars. So you're taking notes. So it turns into a learning experience. So next time you do it, I haven't repeated the 5 day. I'm very insulin sensitive generally, so I don't really see why I would do a 5 day, but it was good to try it out and tell the world, yes, you can do it as a type 1. Because everyone tells me, no, you're type 1, you shouldn't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that.
Right.
Well, who says you can't?
Right. Right. Well,
So
because
let's talk about fasting, intermittent fasting, but also extended fasting.
Sure. Absolutely. It's just a matter of knowing how to dose your insulin properly. You can do it if you know how to adjust your insulin, period. That's it. I mean, we don't just go low for no reason. We go low because we have too much insulin in our body. And if you make sure you don't have too much insulin in your body, you can not eat for days.
Yeah.
You know, if people are fasting or going low and they haven't taken a mealtime bolus, then we have a very clear answer. They have too much basal or too much long acting. You know, I mean, I think intermittent fasting is super easy. I mean, if you're only eating 8 hours a day, great. Makes your life easier, because you're probably not having a big dinner at bedtime, which is a nightmare for overnight, right? And so hopefully your window, I mean, I think when I do intermittent fasting, I do like 9 to 5, right? 9 to 5, because I don't want to eat after 5. I have, you know, I sleep at 75 or 80 all night long. And that's because I have no food and no bolus that's, you know, making me go up or down. And so as long as you know how to reduce your basal to match your fasting, I don't really know what there is more to talk about.
True. When you did your extended fast, did you notice that you were requiring less insulin on the second day and then less on a third day?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Extended fasting is very different than intermittent fasting, for sure, because your physiology changes.
Yes.
You know, absolutely. The body's fuel needs are adjusted. Yeah. So I was down to, I think I took 1 unit of Lantus in the morning and 1 unit of Lantus at night. And that's all I was on for 5 days.
Wow, that's incredible. Incredible.
Yeah. And so I always tell people when they say they want to test their basal rate and they said, oh, why don't I just not eat for a day? I'm like, well, I actually prefer you not to do it that way. You know, when I help people with testing their basal rate, we break up the fasting into, you know, why don't you skip dinner one night and we'll check you overnight. Do that a few times. Next phase, why don't you skip breakfast, you know, eat at noon or 1 a few days, because your physiology, your you know, your fuel needs are completely different if you're in that complete water fast for days state. Yeah. So you can't basal test if you're going to not eat for 3 days.
Yeah, I have basal testing in my notes. It's one of the most important things, and I think every type 1 should know how to adjust their basal rates, because our basal rates change. I mean,
absolutely.
It works for 1 year, and then the following years, something changes. I don't know, the environment. Perhaps I'm in a different place, and perhaps my hormones are changing, whatever.
You've gained weight, you've lost weight, you're more active, you're less active, your diet's adjusted a little bit, even though diet really shouldn't be affecting basal, but if you're eating a lot of fat, it probably will, you know, things like that.
I think, yeah, I noticed that. I'm glad you mentioned that with fat. When I eat fat, yeah, my basal suddenly just goes out of whack. So
not strong enough. It's not strong enough because of the fat's presence creates that temporary insulin resistance.
Exactly. So I have to watch my fat intake as well as the carb intake. So so how do people do basal testing? You already broke it down. So they have to restrain from eating for 6 hours in the morning, maybe on one day. And then just can you explain?
Well, in order to test the basal rate, you have to create a scenario where you haven't eaten for at least 2 to 4 hours, depending on how big your meal was. How, you know, if you only had one hard-boiled egg, you don't need to wait 4 hours. But if you have a big whatever, you need to wait at least 4 hours. And then we're going to assume that the rapid is done in 4 hours, even though that's an assumption, because the timing of insulin varies by many different variables. But more or less, I'll tell people to have a small dinner at 5, right? And so ideally, their last insulin was at 5, their last eating was at 5. So then ideally by bedtime, they haven't had to eat after dinner to treat a low, and they haven't had to correct a high. And hopefully they're somewhere in a healthy range with their blood sugar at bedtime, right? You can't be high, you can't be low. You got to be in a healthy range. Now, let's say you're 110 when you go to bed, a perfectly set basal rate, you'll wake up at 110, you know? And even if somebody goes to bed at 160, even though I will help people to not do that, but just for the teaching point here, you actually want to wake up at the same number. If they go to bed at 160, I want them to wake up at 160. Or if they wake up at 160, then we know their basal is set correctly. And people often pause there and they're like, wait a minute, what? I don't want to be 160. I said, yes, but your basal's job isn't to lower a 160. That is not your basal's job. Your basal's job is to keep you flat. If you were 160 before bed, you underdosed at dinner, right? You do the rapid to get you to slide into home base at bedtime, which you're, 80 or 90 or whatever, and then you stay flat, right? So if I was at 160 and then woke up at 80 the next morning, so many people are like, oh, it was perfect. I'm like, no, that's horrible. You dropped 80 points. What happens if the next night you go to bed at 80? You're going to wake up at 0.
Okay.
Right? So when I break up the day, so overnight is first, it's the most important. And it's the only section I do for people on shots because they don't have multiple points of adjustment that they can make. And then we recreate that scenario for the first half of the day, the middle of the day. And, it can take a month or so, that's why my program is 3 months, and I always tell people they don't have to do it consecutively. You don't have to have an early small dinner on Monday and then you have to do it again Tuesday, and you have to, people's lives are busy. But it's a really important exercise because it's like, if you're going to build a house, you really want to make sure that foundation is steady. And that's what we're doing. It takes a lot of work to do all the basal testing, but then once you're confident, then, I think it's wonderful when people feel confident that they can go to bed at 80. And, that is a very confident person. They understand, they have faith in their basal. They have faith that they haven't overdosed at dinner. They are giving their body, a beautiful gift. But how many people go to bed at 80 in the general population of type 1 as a whole? I would say less than 10 or 5%, really, because they don't have the confidence to do it safely. or they don't know, they don't think it's safe, they're scared, right? They haven't been trained to, or perhaps they don't have the discipline to, not eat a ton before bed. Because once you start eating a lot before bed, you have too many variables going on.
Becomes a habit as well. So do you remove some of the other variables during basal testing, for example, alcohol consumption, because that's going to have an impact on the blood sugar. So
sure.
Yeah.
You can't be drinking a lot of alcohol that day. You can't have just, you can't be getting sick. People are like, oh, I did basal testing, it was perfect because I was sick, so I didn't eat anything. And I was like, you can't basal test when you're sick, right? Because all the hormones are going to make you more insulin resistant. If you just climbed Mount Everest that day, it's not a good day to, if you just watched movies for 8 hours, not a good day, right? You can't dramatically increase or decrease your activity level. Alcohol definitely is not something you should have at dinner. And then, no recent cortisone shots, right? For females, oftentimes you don't want to do it the week before your period. Yeah, I mean, I have a whole list of.
So, Jody, let's talk about matching insulin to carbs. I struggled with that. When everything changed in the 1990s, well, actually, I was introduced to this way of living, live like a normal person, eat like anyone else.
Me too.
Just count your carbs and take your insulin.
That's
it was the year 2000. It was the year 2000. I was introduced in the UK here to this new concept. And initially I welcomed it. I thought, ooh, this is brilliant.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
I enjoyed it. So I was always health conscious. So I always cooked at home and prepared jars of jam from the garden at home.
Oh, great.
Home cooked, homemade. I thought I could get away with it. I thought it was a healthy way of eating. But my A1C was so high, I couldn't bring it down. I even went to the extreme of making pasta at home because I wouldn't buy the shop made ones. Made no difference to my blood to my blood sugars or my A1C. I didn't have a CGM back then. So I decided to grow my vegetables, all organic, in the garden here in the UK, out of all places. Nice. You barely ever see the sun. But I thought I have to do that for my health, and my A1C wouldn't come down. I removed the carbs, my A1C went back to normal. So for me, that's all it took. I tried everything. So why is it that matching insulin to carbs doesn't work for a lot of people, including myself?
Well, it's kind of like we're asking people to carve the David with a spoon. We don't have the tools. Insulin is slow. Insulin is unpredictable. The digestion changes every day. The timing of when the blood sugar is going to hit, if you add a little fat, you add a little protein, now it's going to be delayed. What kind of glycemic index is your meal? Is it high? Is it low? Are you injecting into scar tissue? Are you injecting and then, and you're totally sedentary? Are you injecting and then you're active? I mean, they tried to make it sound so simple, but it is not simple. It is not simple. Thinking about all the different variables of the timing of the digestion, even the same meal every day. What if you're super stressed out one day eating your lunch, and then you're not stressed out at all the next day eating the exact same lunch, and then you did a 3-hour workout that morning and you ate the exact same lunch, and then you totally didn't work out at all and you slept till noon and you ate the same lunch, right? Those 4 exact same lunches are going to demand different dosing strategies, right? I don't care if you are convinced how many carbs is in the meal. Carbs alone carbs are like one of the endless factors that you need to consider to dose appropriately, right? Protein you have to assess, fat you have to assess, and all the other things I mentioned. And so I get that they wanted to try to help us make diabetes easier, and but they're really doing us a disservice because it's not true. It's not true. It's not true that you just count your carbs and dose. And frankly, it's so dangerous. As Bernstein says, the law of small numbers is brilliant because the less carbs you eat, the less likely you'll go high, right? And the smaller amount of insulin you need. And so then it's the less smaller margin for error when you dose, right? Because when you eat a lot of carbs, you risk going extremely high, and you also risk going extremely low because you have to give so much insulin for what you're eating. And what if it hits, but your food isn't digesting? What if you're developing gastroparesis and you don't even know it, and you dose 10 units of rapid for your pasta, but the pasta is not going to digest for 3 hours, and now your insulin's peaking and you have 10 units? Like, that's just death waiting to happen. So it is lower. It's kind of like, my analogy is, do you want to go to Vegas and gamble with, $100 and just have fun and, whatever, bet $5 here, bet $10 here, and just have fun? Or do you want to take your life savings and gamble at Vegas, right? The risk of what you have to lose is not worth it, right? When you start eating 30, 40, 50, 60 grams of carb, the risk you have, to me, it's not worth it. You have a huge risk of going super high, and you have a super risk of going low, because dosing to fit that perfectly and stay between, a tight, low end normal range, good luck. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's virtually impossible. And it's also very disheartening. It's very frustrating, and it causes anxiety. I mean, I'm not surprised why type 1 diabetics just want to give up at the end. This horrible disease, they refer to it. I have a big type 1 diabetic following. I just tell me this horrible disease, I hate it. And I go, I don't even mind mine now. So it's like, because I don't find it difficult to deal with it. I mean, I'd rather be type 1 than anything else that I can't manage. And I'm in full control of it. So, but the anxiety is horrible. I used to remember, just as I would think, I've cracked the code now. to dose perfectly for, I don't know, a large sort of portion of pizza, for example, right? Next time I would eat that same pizza, wouldn't work. That code wouldn't work. So it just constantly beats at you, and it's horrible. Yeah. And anxiety. So do you have some of your patients who are experiencing that sort of depression and anxiety because of their type 1?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's why I started my membership program. So I have a monthly membership program where I go live on Zoom with, a group of type 1s, and we just make it fun. I bring in lots of different topics, sometimes about, blood sugar regulation. But my topic last week was the benefits of doing cold therapy, taking a cold shower, doing a cold bath, all the cold exposure actually increases insulin sensitivity. And even if you're just doing 11 minutes a week, you do 5 showers, where each shower you have at least 2 minutes where you're really cold, that makes a difference in your physiology. So I talk about fun stuff, and I'm bringing in a speaker next week that's all about, the emotional side of diabetes. And so I have 3 different offerings. I do a private program for 3 months where I talk to everybody, once a week for 3 months. And obviously in that format, I get to know my patients really well. And I always touch base with, the emotional side of things. And then my second offering is the group program. And that's just a simple monthly fee, and we get together once a week on Zoom. So a lot of times the private 3-month program, people, once they finish that program, then they join the membership program. But doing the 3-month program is not a prerequisite. A lot of people just find me and want the community. So I do make a point to check in with people's emotional health a lot. Yeah. And then the third offering I have is I have training courses that basically I wish every type 1 in the world could get access to. And in my opinion, they capture every bit of education on how to get good blood sugar control that every type 1 needs. How to avoid the blood sugar roller coaster, how to stay in range after meals, how to master your blood sugar with exercise. But I also have a course called How to Stay Positive. So it's just a fun little 25-minute course, and I just give all my favorite reasons for why we can have a positive, happy life. Yeah.
I will put all those details in the description below. So do follow Dr. Jody and support her efforts and join her programs. You will find the details in the description below. Okay, we talked about basal and bolus. In one of your blogs, I believe, or it was the video? No, it was a blog. You talk extensively about correction factor. So what is a correction factor and why is it relevant to type 1s?
Well, dosing at meal times is probably the most challenging skill. And it's the one that we have to do multiple times every single day. Once you know how to set your basal rate and you're confident, you can kind of just trust that it's going to be set for a while, even though I recommend double checking it maybe once a year or something like that. Or anytime you skip dinner, right? You inevitably are doing a basal test that night as you sleep. But mealtime dosing it's a challenge. Are you going to take some up front? Are you going to do an extended bolus? How many minutes, this whole like dose 15 minutes before you eat. Well, that's not going to work. I mean, are you high? Are you low? Are you eating high glycemic? Are you eating low glycemic? You can't just dose 15 minutes before you eat. You have to use your brain and think through when and how you have to dose, right? So inevitably you might be high after you eat. So now let's say you're 150 or you're 250, right? How much insulin do you need? Well, standard medicine just gives you this nice little formula and it says, okay, 1 unit drops you 50 points. Or maybe 1 unit drops you 30 points, or maybe 1 unit drops you 100 points. But there's a formula for how to figure that out. However, anytime you're using your correction factor, you can't assume that little ratio that you were given is going to work perfectly. Because once again, there's other variables happening that you must consider. So I always explain this. This is food pushing you up, insulin pushing you down. So these two trajectories in the 2 to 3 to 4 hour window after you eat are always happening because food can take 4 hours to digest. Insulin can take 4 hours to stop working, assuming you're using rapid in your bolus, right? So these two things are always working. So let's say you're 2 hours out from the meal and you're high and you see that you're 200. And so you think I need 2 units because I'm 1 to 50 and I want to be 100. So I need 2 units. I said, well, okay, but how much insulin do you still have on board, right? How much food is still digesting? So if you ate an apple 2 hours ago and now you're high, you can feel pretty confident that you don't have anything pushing you up anymore. If you ate a much bigger meal with a lot of protein and fat and carb 2 hours ago, you can guarantee there's still something pushing you up 2 hours later. So what is the variable that's still pushing you up? Now think of the second variable. Did you give yourself 1 unit of insulin 2 hours ago or 6 units of insulin 2 hours ago? Because if you gave yourself 1 unit of insulin 2 hours ago, that's not going to touch you if you're high 2 hours later. That 1 unit is got not a lot of power. If you gave yourself 6 units of insulin 2 hours ago, well, it is a lot of power at 2 hours out, right? And so that little I'm 200 2 hours out has a lot more going on to it. You can't correct that the same. You have to think, did I have, what's happening here? How much food is still pushing me up? How much of that 2 hour ago shot is pushing me down? And then you have to figure out your correction factor, right? And so people are like, that sounds impossible. I'm like, well, I really know that when we experiment with ourselves over and over again, I really know that our intuition is spot on. Like we need to start trusting our intuition because you can't graph this into a engineering spreadsheet. You'll never get the precise number at every correction that you need. There's a level of educated guess and intuition every time you correct because these variables are too hard to predict with precision. Having said that, one of my favorite things to do if you're within that 1 to 3 hour window since you gave your rapid dose 1 to 3 hours, you still have a lot of insulin that could potentially push you down. 4 hours, everybody's different, but at 4 hours, I'm not going to have faith that I have a bunch of insulin pushing me down. 3 hours, maybe if the shot was big. 2 hours for sure. 1 hour for sure. So if you're high 2 hours out, I always say, why don't you just poke your finger, first of all, and get a real-time in this moment reading? Because Dex can always be a little off when all this is going on, right? So get a real-time reading. Okay, so you're 200 on the finger poke. Well, why don't you go do a bunch of movement? Jump on your trampoline. I have a little mini trampoline. Turn on music, dance, clean the house, go on a walk, do 5 minutes of squats, do some sit-ups, move your body, go find some stairs, walk outside, just move your body, whatever, make it fun. It's not a full workout. You're just getting active, right? You're getting active, jumping jacks, whatever. And then 20 minutes. So do that for at least 5 minutes, ideally 10. And then let 20 minutes go by and I'll poke your finger again. Okay. Because if you still have a lot of insulin on board, that little 5-10 minute, sorry, my phone, I'm going to turn that off. That little 5-10 minute activity is going to be enough to really kick in that insulin that's still here. And now you're going to make it go a lot stronger. And guess what? 20 minutes goes by, you might very well not need a correction anymore, right? 20 minutes goes by and you've dropped a ton. Great. Aren't you glad you didn't correct? But if you don't go down at all, I think you're pretty confident at that point that this trajectory is winning the race for sure. You just added a bunch of exercise into your picture and you didn't drop it all. Well, you correct away, I'd say. I mean, if you're at 2, especially if you're at 2 hours out from your shot, because that could be a heavy peak time, or 1 hour out, there's a lot of insulin wanting to drop you at that point. 4 hours out, not so much. But 1 to 2 hours, you should have a lot of insulin on board, ready to really drop you, right? And then you throw exercise in there and you didn't go down, confidently correct. Yeah. Now, the thing is, you can drop dramatically in that scenario. And then the thing is, you might have just really took that last bit of the shot from 2 hours ago and really pushed it into gear and let it kind of run its course. And that's why you went down. If your food is finished digesting, now you're going to stay normal and you're all good. If your food is still digesting, you're going to have come down, but an hour or two later, you're going to go back up because now the insulin is done, but the food is not. Yeah. So this is something I spent a lot of time helping people that they've never thought through it this way. Like parents will say, I put my kid to bed at 100 and then by midnight they're 300. And I'm like, well, why do you think that happened? At bedtime, the mealtime insulin was still working. At midnight, it wasn't, but the food was still pushing. I said, you had a big dinner, didn't you? You had a lot of protein, you had a lot of fat, you had a lot of carb, because if you're going to 300 at midnight and you went to bed at 100 at 9, the insulin finished its game, but the dinner did not. So people have to think like this to get, accurate dosing.
It's a lot of thought for a type 1 diabetic.
It's a lot. That's why just eat low carb and your life's easier.
It is. It doesn't mean you don't have to count anything anymore. I mean, you still have to calculate everything. You still have to, to make the effort. But at least one variable is kind of managed better. That's what I do it.
I mean, you're gambling with $100 instead of your life savings. Okay. You're gambling. You still might lose money. You still might come out negative, but it's not going to be life savings negative.
Yeah, I mean, the highs and lows are much kind of smaller and narrower range. That's what I know. Yeah. It's not like I'm not flatlining all day long. Forget that. I don't. I would be lying to people when I say I might just stay completely flat for like 8 hours, like same number, exact same number for 8 hours. Yeah. That's the maximum I can get. It goes up and down. Yeah. But those ups and downs are like within a narrow margin. I like that.
So like Here's my, oh, maybe this is here. I'll undo my little thing here. Let's see here. So now you can see my background, but so here's my number right now, right? I had a little, that's just my dawn phenomenon. That was like, little excitement for waking up. I did a 75-minute yoga class. And then here's my overnight, I was nice and steady, probably about 70 all night. But then, last night for dinner, I had a couple spikes dinner, but I managed them, right? So that's kind of typical for me, I'd say.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Mine are very similar too. So
I mean, perfection is not, I mean, if I apologize if I offend anybody, but my goal is not to be 83 all day long. I just don't think that's realistic. I don't think it's possible. I think it creates too much anxiety. I think it's a disservice for people to think they should try to be 83 all day long, because then they're 95 and they're stressed. Like, that is not supportive, in my opinion. So I'm all for finding whatever works for each person, as long as we can enjoy what we're eating, because that is also something that I don't want to steal from anybody. People say, oh, should I eat keto? And the first question I'll be like, do you want to eat keto? Or do you think you should eat keto? Because I don't support people in doing things they should, right? I want them to find what brings them joy. Now, of course, if eating McDonald's all day brings you joy, I'm going to talk you out of that. But, I, having had the eating disorder I did, having been restricted, and then going to bagels and fruit, and all that with food, I don't like being real rigid and strict, because that triggers my eating disorder. And so I don't teach being rigid. I don't support anybody in trying to be 83 all the time. I think it is too stressful and unnecessary, personally. So that's my strong 2 cents on that.
So that takes me to the next question then, that when it comes to time in range, you work with the American Diabetic Association, sort of recommended, which is actually the same in the UK. So that even my CGM, which isn't the DEX, it's the Freestyle Libre, the default system, the default time in range is up to, I think, well, our measurements, it's 10
for you.
Yeah, so 180.
No, it's not. 180. No, it's not okay. It's not okay. The only reason why I feel like they must be doing that is because the majority aren't even in range anyways. So I kind of support, once I'm in front of somebody, I will never support that. But in terms of promoting that to the masses, the benefit is that if people already feel like they're losing, and then they drop it to 140, then people are going to feel like they're losing even more. Then, if people can barely run a mile and I'm telling them they should run 24, they're going to stop even running a mile, aren't they? They're like, I'm never going to get to 24. So what's the point? That's why my passion of education, I want to see a massive push of proper education, because then people won't be scared to have their new goal be 70 to 120 or 70 to 140. That is the range that is proven to be healthy. I mean, non-diabetics go up to 140 for 45 minutes after they eat sometimes, right? So, normal blood sugars are in that 70 to 100, 70 to 120, 140, right? There's nothing healthy about 150 all day long. There's nothing. It's inflammatory. There's nothing healthy about 160s, 170s, and 180s. And frankly, you and I were told 180 was good 40 years ago. And we know better, and they still haven't changed their tune. But I kind of, like I said, support them in keeping it there right now, because it will just push people away even more. It'll make them feel like it's impossible. Why, it's like if everybody's getting a C and now you're telling them they're failing, and a C is a failure, and actually you need an A+, they're like, they can't even get a B, and you're telling them they have to get an A. you know, it's just not motivational to make a change in the masses. Yeah.
Dr. Jody, we have to do part 2 to talk more about exercise. But
Yes.
for now, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for your service. And I'm so grateful to all of you that are listening. And I hope you really gained a lot from this talk today.
Thank you. Bye for now.